So if you're like me in any capacity, you have made a bad decision in your life, whether that's spending too much money on camera gear, eating an extra slice of pie when you're like, I didn't want to have pie in the first place, and whatever else. We, as human beings, love to think of ourselves as rational, calculating, economic creatures that are always going to be acting in our best interest and maximizing our utility in economic terms. But in reality, we are irrational creatures in some fashion. We let our emotions get the better of us, our physiology get the better of us. There are just opportunities in life where we just make irrational decisions. So, I'm making this video series that is going to talk about this book, Predictably Irrational, by Dan Ariely. I have read this 3 times in my life and how I have applied it to my life. The first chapter is on relativity, so let's talk about how relativity in your life can be irrational and how you can maybe be more rational or relative. Yeah, alright, let's go into this. Alright, today we are talking about relativity. My name is John Jags, and I am a cinematographer, motion graphic artist, photographer, creative in some capacity. All those things. I want to hopefully help you apply this concept of relativity to your life so you can make better decisions as a creative or just as a human being in general. So, the way the book describes relativity is that we as human beings will not make decisions in absolute terms, especially in today's world surrounded by social media, marketing campaigns, influence of family members and friends and whatever else. We never, ever are fully objective. So there's so many things that are influencing our decisions, and what I hope to shed light on is how we can be as objective as possible. The book describes this in an example where a company is selling a web service or news service. There's 3 options: a internet only and internet only, grammar is hard, a print only option, and then a print and internet option. Now, what are the prices of those? The internet only is $59 according to the book. Then the print is $125, and then the print and internet is also $125. Now, if you were an irrational human being, you'd think to yourself, well, if the print and the internet is $125, while the print only is also $125, I'm just gonna get both of those for the same price. You basically have 3 inputs of information, the 3 options, and the one that you're going to choose is ideally, and most likely as a human being, the one that will maximize your utility, your usefulness of your decision overall. So getting the print and the internet subscription is, in a way, the most rational decision. Now, how do we make irrational decisions based on the available information that we have? So the biggest key behind relativity is context. How are we making decisions based on the context of everything else, relatively speaking? So what does that mean, let's say in relation to buying camera gear? First, the book uses an example of buying a racing bike. You don't know what racing bike you want until you see a champion of the Tour de France, or whatever it's called, using a specific brand. In the same way that we buy camera gear, we don't know what camera body we want to use, what lens we want to use, what software like Adobe or Resolve we want to use until we see someone else using it. And we see such amazing things from so many people out there on social media. And then when we pick up the camera body or we put on that new camera lens, we start doing our thing and we realize, hey, you know what? My stuff doesn't look anywhere as good as the other people. Now, that's a whole separate issue that we'll talk about in just a moment, but really what it comes down to is the years of experience that those people have using a tool, because a camera body or a lens or software is just a tool. It's a means to the end, which is the video that you saw on YouTube or Instagram or whatever else. That's the tool. What we're not considering in context of making our decision is the years of experience that that person had who was using the camera body that we were like, okay, I'm gonna make a decision based on the tools that they have, because we often perceive the outcome as a product of the tools when really it's a product of the application. So in context and in relative terms, when it comes to our realm as visual creatives, relativity is important because it helps us identify what is the context of the application. So using a camera body, using a lens, it's not just the tool, it's the actual application and the person behind that. So this brings me to my next thought, and how you can be intentional with your purchases, with your actions as a creative, based on the information that you have available to you. Next, I want to show you a visual example of relativity. So there's these two arrays of circles. You have one circle in the middle, and then surrounding the circle in the middle, you have either small circles or big circles. Now, this is important because that circle in the middle is actually the same size, but the way we judge it is based on what is around it. Now, I'm going to translate this and transcribe this concept into the way we consume media as creatives, or just as people in general, specifically social media. And this might get a little hippy-dippy, but I have applied this concept of relativity to my life because we always, I guess, let's quote the book, we look at our decisions in a relative way and compare them locally to the available alternatives. So that those circles, the alternative to looking at one of those circles is either the big one or the small one. And we can quantifiably say that it's either bigger circle or smaller circles, but when we can't see the second array or the second option, it's harder to make a judgment call because we're only working with what is locally available. Now, social media, why did I bring that up? As someone who creates content for social media and enjoys consuming social media in some capacity, it's very easy to fall in what I like to call, and what many people like to call, a comparison trap. We look at other people creating awesome work, and I think it's great that people do awesome things, but it is also very easy to look at that content and judge ourselves based on that content if we are trying to create something similar. Basically, if we consume media that is similar to what we aspire to create and judge ourselves based on what we expose ourselves to, we're always going to feel inferior. And I'm going to quote another book, and that is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, I believe. I'll fix that in the notes. But basically, one of his rules is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who you are, not to who someone else is today. But as Predictably Irrational shows, it is very easy to compare something to something else when it is locally available. So your proximity to your stimulus is going to influence your decisions, and depending on your, I guess, mental fortitude or mental bandwidth for being able to process those things and being okay. I never ever be envious and jealous. And I'm not saying like ignore social media, but I think it's important to realize that when you're looking at other content, and especially for myself, when I'm looking at other content, I try and look at it and be happy for other people, but not look at it in a way that like, oh, that person is better than me and I need to be competitive with them. No, it's important to be happy for other people and celebrate other people, but avoid the comparison trap. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. So this takeaway here from this portion on locally available information and how we look at things in proximity to everything else, Be conscious of what you expose yourself to and how it might influence your decisions. All right, so the next and last thing I want to talk about when it comes to relativity is, I guess, the magnitude in which a decision is made and how micro decisions are made based on the macro decision. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use another example from the book. You're buying a banquet, you're catering food for a banquet, and the budget is $5,000. And the caterer comes up and requests or suggests that you have a soup addition to the catering food option. And that addition is going to be $200. Now, relatively speaking, your budget is $5,000. $200 more is relatively not that much. Now, let's say hypothetically you were buying lunch just for yourself, and the server suggests that you buy some soup as well as an appetizer. Now your lunch is going to be $15 and the soup is going to be $7. So relatively speaking, the catering option, we're more likely to have the soup as a catered option because relative to the big item, that's a small price to pay compared to buying soup with your lunch. Now, what does this apply to the way we spend money? I'm going to use camera gear, for example. The way we buy camera gear is always going to be relative to how much we spend on the gear itself. So let's say hypothetically you're buying an A7 III, which is about $2,000. Now, if you're at a Sammy's Camera or B&H and they're like, hey, buy this filter, let's say the filter is $50. Right? Yeah, sure, let's just throw on the filter. Or they're like, hey, get this this camera strap, it's like $60. You might spend that money on the small things like a camera strap or filters or whatever else because, like, relative to the actual camera price, it's pretty small. But if you're buying like a lens, which is a much larger purpose, you're more likely to make a conscious decision on that. And how does this apply to wasting money on gear? I can't tell you how much time and money I've wasted buying gear I don't need because I'm like, oh sure, why not? It's only like $50 or whatever. Like little GoPro straps or things like I never ever use. Biggest example, these macro tubes. Put them on your camera, you get some cool looking sort of macro shots without a macro lens. This cost me, I think, $30. Used it once, not even on a client project, and then now I just would rather buy a macro lens because some of the specifications for a real macro lens versus the macro tubes just end up working a little bit better, but it's a whole separate issue. My point is, when looking at prices relatively, always be conscious of how that price is going to influence your perception of other prices. And when you think of that, you might end up saving more money on your purchases in general because you're not going to buy the extra guac at Chipotle if it's like $3 and your lunch is $11 because that's a relatively large portion of what the initial price was, but they always upsell you on that versus being more conscious about those decisions. And then you'll be like, oh wait, if I'm more conscious about how price affects my perception of other prices relatively, I might end up saving more money and then be able to buy some bigger items of gear that will actually make a difference. So if you've made it this far in the video, thank you very much for watching. I just want to recap this really quick. We talked about relativity and how it applies to at least my life as a cinematographer, motion graphic artist, photographer, whatever you want to call it. So we defined it as basically looking at information and making decisions based on what is around it. So when it comes to making decisions, we're more likely to make a decision if we have something that is easily comparable so then we can judge the value on it. So let's say you're buying shoes or a TV, you might end up buying the middle option of like the least expensive or most expensive because it gives us some perceived value of what the quality is. The next thing is locally available information. What we see surrounding a decision or something we are going to judge in some capacity is going to be influenced by what is around it. So the way I apply this for looking at social media is trying to separate myself from what is actually around it and looking at things objectively, and being aware of this relativity comparison trap makes at least me more able to be happy for other people and celebrate other people's victories without letting my own skill level become a point of contention for myself. Because I can't tell you how many times I've looked at some cool things like, oh, why am I not that good? But in reality, I'm still making progress. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. I'm making progress towards my goals, and who I was yesterday, my photos, my video yesterday is not as good as it was today, and I'm happy about that because today I know I'm better versus worrying about someone else. And then the last thing we talked about is looking at prices, I guess, relatively, and the way it will influence our purchasing decisions when we have an initial purchase influencing the sub-micro purchases. So, biggest takeaways are: avoid the comparison trap by being aware of it and understanding that locally available information will influence our perceptions, and how prices will also influence our perceptions based on what is locally available surrounding a purchasing decision. So, that is, I guess, my biggest takeaways from the chapter The Truth About Relativity in the book Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. The next chapter is Fallacy of Supply and Demand, so we'll talk about that next. But I will let you guys go there. I lied. Wait, we have one more thing to do. We have some new YouTube subscribers that we gotta do a shout out to. So, alright, so the first one that is new is a Mr. Jamie Vassir. We met through Mr. Joey Spears, and I think everything that you do with Team LTD is awesome. So please keep it up. I am glad to have met you. Next is Alec Swainpool. Hey, Alec, thank you very much. I appreciate you subscribing, man. Let's go to Pokey sometime, because, yeah, you're local. So, Video Arcade. And looks like you make some videos, too. Right on, man. Keep it up. And Tanya Franco? But there's a little accent. I don't know how to pronounce that, so I apologize. But hey, thanks for subscribing. I appreciate it. I like your photo. It's very like, it's black and white, but it looks like it has like a nice 50s or 40s sort of vibe to it. So right on. Well, those are the new subscribers, and that was my talk on my favorite book, Predictably Irrational, talking about supply and demand. Next, economics hashtag. Yeah, all right. I will see you beautiful people in that next video, and